Hello everyone and welcome back to the tutorial series on how to use GreenScenario. Now that we have successfully installed the plugin, we can have a look at the components that we can use. And they are grouped in two categories. One of them are the geometry components, and there's 7 of them, and they represent different types of elements that we can actually add to the model. So if I place one in drawing, depending on my display settings, either I will see the full name of the component or I will see the icon representing it. And no matter which one I choose, they will look very similar. They will always need some sort of input, geometry input, and there will be an output wire that will be connecting to one of the utilities components to make sense of all these of all the model elements put together. And there's also additional options, and if we click on this button over here, additional options will appear, and they are related to the component and specific to its characteristics. So we can always choose a type. In this case, it could be a landscape material type gravel or different detention type. And there will be some specific features over here that we can define using sliders. Sometimes it's checkboxes, sometimes it's radio buttons, and similar. But then once we have added one of these components to the drawing, we need to create a network of these so-called nodes that would define the entire model. And to make it easier for us, there is a template component that when placed in the drawing, it will generate a default setup for us. So if I just click on this button over here, generate, you can see that we have created a network of these components that have been already connected for us. And we can see here, this is our landscape material component. We have the detention basing, and the remaining 5 components are also here. All of them have already a pre-selected geometry input for us, and looking at the color of it, we can tell that they need some geometry, so nothing has been referenced yet. But then let's focus on how the network is being created. All these input components, they're connected into the scenarios component, which actually lives over here. And we can create multiple scenarios through zooming in on this interface and just clicking on the plus button or a minus button. And there's also a selector of the active scenario, so we can, in this case, we only have one, but then if we add more to the component, we can just select the active scenario, and we can remove the ones that we don't need over here. And then the scenarios component is connected to the engine component, which is the main heart of GreenScenario. And we can see here that the engine lives on the utilities tab as well. And as input, it takes the scenarios that we have created, some input data, and input data also has an additional file that we need to link to it if we want to perform a specific set of calculations. We can also look at some of the categories here and all these tabs, and some of these inputs will be very important, and we'll go through them as well. And what it also needs is this custom preview component, which actually renders all our geometry. And there is one more important thing that we need to understand. Like each time we see these yellow or red notifications over here, is essentially Grasshopper's way of telling us that something's wrong with the drawing or something's missing. And right now, it's telling us that, well, there's no object defined in the drawing. So it's essentially, we have connected all the nodes, but all of the inputs over here are yellow, so we don't have any geometry that's referenced. So let's just do this. I'll create a very basic rectangle, and I'll take this one and set a reference to this first rectangle, and immediately you can see the color has changed. And what I'll do is I'll just turn the remaining ones off by clicking off the components on the canvas, clicking disable, and then we'll see that everything here has changed. We can ignore this error or the wording over here because it's just telling us that some daily precipitation or some specific calculations will not be performed. But then we can have a look at what the engine component is complaining about right now. And it's telling us that the given key was not present in the dictionary. And it's a somewhat cryptic way of GreenScenario telling us that there are no materials loaded into this particular file, Rhino file that we're working on with. So if we look under the materials tab over here, if you don't see it, you go into options, show toolbars, and we just scroll down to here to find materials are hiding. Where are they hiding? Materials. Excuse me, here. Materials. If you don't see this tab, just click over here and then say materials. And right now, this tab is empty, so we don't have any materials saved in the drawing. And there is a template as well that helps us populate it. So I'll just move it over here to the side. From the template component that we have placed in drawing, we just choose from the drop-down menu that we want to generate materials, and then hit the generate button, and you'll see all these materials being populated here with default GreenScenario materials. If you ever want to change them, you can just do it over here, and then the setup will be saved in the drawing. And now the last thing that we need to do is we just need to refresh it. So essentially this is your go-to button over here, reset. If something was broken and you don't really know what's going on, just hit reset. And then after a few seconds, it should update. And then what we have is the most basic setup for GreenScenario, where we have one area defined by a curve. In our case, it's a landscape material. Asphalt, and then we have some very basic KPIs displayed over here. Some of them, if we click on the name, they actually trill open, and then we can see more details about that. But this is how you would create the most basic setup for GreenScenario.